All right, we've arrived at our final speaker for today. So this is George Phillips, who's the co-founder of Cloud Cannon and lives in Dunedin, New Zealand. And today, George is talking about structured Jekyll sites for enterprise design systems. All right, over to you, George.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me on today. Today I'll be talking about Jekyll sites for enterprise design systems. This is more of a high-level talk on implementing systems across everything to reduce communication required between developers and for speeding up growing teams. So, as I said, structuring Jekyll sites for enterprise design systems. Clear communication is difficult. Understanding makes it easier. Systems create faster understanding. As I said, we'll be talking a lot about different systems. So I'm just going to jump through some definitions to begin with. An enterprise is a commercial entity. They can range from a small one with less than 10 people, way up to thousands of people. The bigger the enterprise, the bigger the problem. A system, a set of rules that people can follow, brings order to chaos. A design system is a system that's focused around design-related issues. And an enterprise design system is one that focuses on the design and communication surrounding an enterprise, big or small. Just to aim for that consistency in the brand and personality, keeping everyone on the same philosophy, and making things easier. This is a great diagram I found online about how communication kind of explodes as you add more people. You can see that after 14 people, there's 91 lines of communication. If you get up to 1,000-person enterprise, there's a high likelihood that you'll never talk to every person in that organization. So systems are a good way of reducing the number of lines required to find the information that you need within the organization. So this is what I've found digging into enterprise design systems. They can be broken down into two different categories, visual and content. We'll be focusing on the visual side of things. This comes down to like logos, colors, typography, iconography, motion. The big thing that we'll be looking at today will be the components library. The other things should be general philosophies, how to write things, the language and grammar, that sort of thing. I've spent quite a bit of time just digging into these different design systems. I found a really great website, designsystemsrepo.com. I've spent hours over the last week just looking through those. And here are a couple that I've really liked. The Atlassian design one is really clean. They go into everything from brand marketing. They go through the logos. They talk about different illustration. They clearly use this for external press to deal with Atlassian and also internal training to keep products up to date. And you can see based on their products, this was something they implemented a few years ago, but they started getting a whole lot more consistency across their products and their branding. So you can see here, they talk about in depth what icons to use, what icons not to. One of the big things we'll be focusing on today, as I said, was the components library, which you can find in the product section. It goes through different components, the states that they can be in, when you should use it, difference between describing an avatar for an entity versus a person, and they break down a whole lot of things. The idea of this is that you get a really consistent brand, really consistent user interface. So if you're jumping between Atlassian's group of products, you don't have to relearn a whole lot of things. You can pick up the ideas that have been set down from this, which is trickled down into the other products. This allows for a whole lot of thinking to be done at once and shared with the whole organization. Another good one I found was lots of governmental ones. This is the United States one, for example. We had a great talk earlier today about Meridian City and how they use Jekyll for this sort of thing. So jumping into here, you can see a whole lot of different components. You've got a big footer, a smaller footer, and an even smaller footer. You've got the header. The big thing about these style guides is generally accessibility. If you're redeveloping this sort of stuff across every single website, chances are the things that are going to suffer are things like accessibility and usability. Putting them all in one place means that you can get down to that level of thinking and make sure that it works on that level. Yeah. So jumping back to my slides, the problem, an enterprise web presence can contain an enormous amount of websites spanning multiple teams. The examples I gave before with Atlassian, they have a huge amount of web applications, but their design guidelines also apply to their websites, their marketing resources, their documentation. So in the scope of Cloud Cannon for us, we have landing pages, we have our blog, our documentation, our onboarding, press center, status page, and we're an organization of less than 20 people. So you can imagine that with a larger organization, these problems have become bigger and bigger. If we built each site separately, that would be a huge amount of technical debt. Sites are often built by different teams, components are redeveloped, design consistency suffers, and costs increase. So we want to solve all of that by building a single design library that can be shared across all of these different websites. Like what we saw in the Atlassian one, they have all those components documented, but the technical solution of how to actually share these between different websites can differ based on which platforms you use. For the Jekyll solution, this is how I am going to structure it. So I have a single theme site, and I use all of the Jekyll features to push it into a whole lot of smaller microsites built in Jekyll. But it's all stored in Git, so you could use a preprocessor to take everything out of this Git site and make it ready to be used in any other platform. Of course, the benefits, resource sharing, components are developed once, there's design consistency, and that's supposed to say cost decrease. Whoops. So that was the problem. We'll jump into how the implementation can look with Jekyll. So Jekyll offers us two different sides of the puzzle. We have a nice development environment, which gives us a whole lot of things to keep our content dry. And by dry, I mean don't reuse, don't repeat yourself, sorry. So we'll be focusing on the development side. This gives us includes layouts, SaaS, themes, plugins, and a whole lot more. Big part of that is probably just having everything stored in Git. The full version history that you get from having a system that can just sit in source control is hugely advantageous. So the first one is Jekyll layouts. Jekyll layouts are templates that wrap around your content. You can build one template and use it across a whole bunch of pages. I'll get into that more. And this is done really easily by creating a HTML file within an underscore layouts directory. And the most important thing is having that content tag there if you want the page content to flow through. These can be inherited or recursive Jekyll layouts. So for this example, I've got a post.html, which is inheriting from the default layout. And that adds a bit of content from what would be using this layout, and then also has the potential to be inherited again. And so you can stack these layouts and keep them really dry. You want to make sure that you're not repeating your header and footer on every single page, so you can put all of that in the default layout and then define your differences between the pages on these inherited on these child layouts. And using them is pretty simple. You have your Frontmatter section and you define which layout you want to use. Jekyll includes, this keeps your content dry again, because you can find all of these different parts of your code that you're rewriting and turn them into a single file that can be included once. So this is what an include looks like. It just sits in the _includes folder, and I've called this one post header.html. And you've got a special namespace in here. So if you want to access a variable that's been passed to an include, you need to use the include namespace and then dot whatever you called your variable. And here we're replacing in our post.html layout that I defined before. I'm passing the page name and the page author to this include. Passing variables to includes is probably one of the best things about it. It fits in really nicely to that component library idea, where you've built a component library once and then you can have this include that reacts to the changes. Jekyll Sass. So if you're writing straight CSS, you'll find that gets quite unruly sometimes. Even just having CSS files import other CSS files, you don't really want to use the default CSS import, because that actually results in another network request. So having Sass alone to import other Sass files is great, but they've got a whole lot of extra things like variables, nesting, mixins, and inheritance. I'm trying to provide a few links here that you can go into later. I'll share the slides and make sure that they're all accessible. So here's what your Sass folder looks like. By default, Jekyll has an _Sass directory, which it reads, and you can name that whatever you like. Jekyll and Ruby World have they generally want you to use word separators as underscores. Yeah, so I do that. And then you need a main.css, and Jekyll needs the Frontmatter variables, the 3 dashes to start and end your Frontmatter here, so that it actually knows to look at this file. If you didn't include those, it's likely that it's just going to try and import using the default CSS one, which, as I said, was a network request. So we want to make sure that we've got those triple dashes at the top. And then we can just import using the start of the file name, and that will go to our file before. Within here, you can use liquid variables, you can output things, you can pull things from config.yaml, you can even add things to the Frontmatter here. Hugely powerful to connect Jekyll and Sass. So you can just inject Jekyll variables into Sass variables and then use them everywhere. In terms of using this for a theme, I quite often see that the navigation is something that changes quite often for breakpoints. So being able to define per site that inherits from a theme what breakpoints are where, so that you can drop to the mobile menu faster for some sites and less for other sites. So Jiggle Themes, I've talked about it a wee bit already, but this is a great way for implementing that structure that I talked about before, where you have the one theme site that has all of your includes and layouts, and then you have all of your sites that bundle install from that. So this is really easy. In the documentation, it talks mostly about using these themes as a way to get started, but I much prefer it as a way to keep your code clean. We've seen that in a couple talks today. But essentially, a Jekyll theme is just a Jekyll site that you're inheriting from. So if you've got a Jekyll site, you can just reference it using the Git path and define what branch you want. This is all part of Bundler. You can define what Git commit, what tag, heaps of things in here. If you're working locally, you can specify a local path, and you can even tell your local bundler where to look at where to take your Git path and know where that exists locally. And then the other thing we need to do is just tell Jekyll that we want to use that theme that we've installed in the bundler. And so these two file names just have to line up. So within this gives you access to the includes, the layouts, the sass, and the assets, all of the other Jekyll theme. So that gets us most of the way there. The other thing we want to make sure that we can use is the data from the theme. Things like variables from the config.yaml, variables from the _data directory, which we had a talk on today. So we can do this by just adding a plugin to Jekyll. I found this one really useful. You install the data plugin, Jekyll data plugin, and then that's it. You've got all of the data from your Jekyll theme. Anything in _data and everything in _config.yaml. So Jekyll's one system that we're using to build this structure. The other thing we want to make sure is that our SCSS is clean. For this, we're going to introduce another system. This is called BEM. It's just a system for writing CSS. It's a naming convention that makes sure that you can share this with your team and say, okay, we're using BEM. And they can read all about the BEM encoding and what that means. And then they should be able to jump into a full project and understand the thinking of how things are named. This is much faster than saying, oh yeah, we just write things however we want them. Again, this is a system that brings order to the chaos. Here's an example in CSS. So you have your block defined as .button. A sub-element always has the __ and then the name. And then you have modifiers on the original block. So you've got button -- orange and button -- big. This is different to how I've done it in the past, which is like you have a button and it also has the class of active. You run into real name spacing issues if you use that, and you find that on some .active things, if you're reusing that class name everywhere, you're going to have that cascade being an issue. And this is what it looks like in SCSS. We use the ampersand to inject that block element onto the start of that selector, and that still outputs to this flat structure. And here's what it looks like in HTML. I've created another include for my subscribe button, and that has all of these elements defined. Before I finish on this, there is a wee bit of controversy around using BEM. Some developers don't like it because it's very verbose. And there's heaps of other systems out there. I think more just the idea of choosing a system will allow you to speed up development and bring new people on as you build a bigger web presence using Jekyll. Next thing I want to cover is deciding what's a component. So this is like what you're going to create an include for. And for this, I found the best thing was Atomic Design. A guy named Brad Frost has a whole website dedicated to this. He's got some awesome talks about how to think about what needs to be broken down. He takes ideas from chemistry to try and define how a UI should work. And this is how he breaks it down. You have atoms. Molecules are built up by a whole lot of atoms. Organisms are built up with a whole bunch of molecules. You have your templates, which is a whole lot of organisms organized on a page. And then you have your pages, which is actually the data put into a template and makes it a real life use case. Here's some photos of from his website about how it can be broken down, what elements exist within which one. And you can see in atoms, he's got things like links, buttons, the photo, an avatar. And then in molecules, he's got things that are starting to look more like a page. So then you've got like the top bar, you've got the top bar of like what looks to be a news story. And then in organisms, you'll have like your full header and your footer, and then like a blog post. And then your templates will be all of it put together, ready for the data. And then your page is with all the data dropped in. And this works really well for Jekyll, because you've got atoms, molecules, and organisms. They can all be turned into a Jekyll include. I would also create a SAS file for each one of those. Maybe not atoms, but definitely molecules and organisms. And you can use that together with the BEM encoding to define what your initial block element is. And then you've got templates, which is perfect for Jekyll layouts. And then you've got pages, which is in the actual site inheriting from the theme. You've got your Jekyll pages, your collection items, and posts. You can also include in there any pages that are generated by plugins. So the next thing I'll jump into is how we use themes in at Cloud Cannon. So on our homepage, this is all built using a theme. So we have a lot of shared components, and we have these different pages that inherit from the same theme. There's a whole lot of shared components, notably this top section here, this navigation on the side. You can see that that is used in more than one page. And we have this put on a whole bunch of internal pages for internal documentation and onboarding. We have our status page, which is a React app sitting inside of the Jekyll theme, pulling from a API endpoint for up-down I/O. So we've got this technology sharing going on. If you want to see how that works and how that plugs together, our theme and our marketing websites are all open source on Jekyll, on GitHub, sorry. Yeah. One other thing I'll cover is how that's used, how we visualize that using Cloud Cannon itself. So this is the projects view in Cloud Cannon. We can visualize all of the different repositories in here and how they look, where they're hosted, what branches we have for each one of these, and we can even create new branches on each one. So this allows us to keep all of the structure really tidy. We're using the microsites infrastructure that Meridian also used in the previous talk. Allows us to keep those build times really low and just be able to spin up new sites as we get new content and that sort of thing. This will build. Once this is built, this is doing a bundle install at the moment, which gets cached. Once this is built, I'll come back to that. So the next piece of tech that we want to talk about is Storybook. Just like adding other systems in order to keep things tidy, this is a system for building an interactive components library. So instead of rolling your own components library in Jekyll, which you can use as well, you can plug this into Storybook, which will create an indexed version of all of your components. So within here, here's kind of a demo of it. Just means that you can visualize all of your components in one place, change them, and see them working. It has here that it works with static HTML. For some projects, we've managed to get it to work with Liquid and actually render the Jekyll includes directly within this space here. We had to do some work around using Liquid.js, which doesn't support all of the things that Jekyll have, but we're slowly patching that and getting it to work faster and faster. Yeah, so going back to my build before, this has built me a whole new site, created a branch, and now I can publish back to the original branch that I came from, which was master. And here we have a version of the doc site just for me to edit and be able to update. So that kind of brings me to the end of my talk. Going back to my initial point, systems create faster understanding, where developers need to make decisions at a system. We're not a particularly big development team, but being able to delegate to systems like Beam and being able to reference things like Storybook, this allows us to get people onboarded faster and grow. The consistency can be tested, so we can add linting to our CSS to make sure it matches a certain pattern. And this way we can keep our costs low and focus on solving the real problems we want to solve rather than repeating work over and over again. So time for questions. You can contact us anytime at support@cloudcannon.com. Just let us know.
Thank you, George. That was really interesting. Yeah, and I've seen that pain firsthand, where you have a whole lot of sites at a company who have all been developed by different people on different tech stacks, and yeah, just having that one system I can see would make a big difference.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, like those different websites can be developed and designed by different agencies following the same design systems and end up with something completely different. That's like exploding the cost of all of those websites and expanding the technical debt that you're bringing on.
Sure. Do you have any tips on, once you get this consistency and these systems set up, to maintaining it with a team? Like Kat mentioned earlier, you can have someone go rogue, suddenly set up Weebly or something, or use their own CSS conventions. So how do you keep it consistent?
Yeah, so I would say that's just a matter of communication, and people want to use what's easiest. So if you can make it easy to use your design system, I think that's why Atlassian has put so much work into their design system, is they want people to use it. They want their employees to build out those sites using those standard components. But I'll screen share again, and this is actually something that I found quite useful in Atomic Design. Where's that? So within here, he has a book. It's quite a good read. He even talks about how you can make this workflow happen and keep it tidy. Talks a lot about audits, going through and auditing pages. So even if someone goes rogue, which is probably going to happen given the size of an organization and the communication problem, you still need to go through all their pages and audit it and figure out how it could fit into that initial design system. He's got a really good diagram here. Let's see. Yeah, it's a good read. Here. So this is like a flow diagram of the decision making that should happen if someone if someone goes rogue without reading the design system at all. You can't really help that. But if they read into it and they have some things that don't fit into it, this diagram here goes through the decision-making process of either making an iteration on an existing component or creating a new one, or
Interesting.
Moving that through the process.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Awesome. Thank you so much for speaking today, George.
No problems. Thank you. Bye.